Mark, you say that one person's life can be changed by watching an episode of a TV series,
Yes.
and I believe you mentioned that yours was.
Yes. Well, I realized as a kid that a single episode of a single TV show could change you forever. It could make you a better person. It could inspire you. It could define the pattern of your entire life for the better. And but of course, that has to be an episode that's written from an emotional truth. It has to be very powerful, very well done, and it has to be something you've never seen before, something fresh. And certainly Outer Limits and Twilight Zone and Star Trek were filled with those kind of episodes. When I saw City on the Edge of Forever on Star Trek by Harlan Ellison, it was astonishing, because in that episode, Kirk goes back to the 1930s, he falls in love with Edith Keeler, played by Joan Collins, and then he learns that in order for the history to work out the way it's supposed to, she has to die. And so he not only lets her die, he stops McCoy from saving her. He physically holds him back so she can be hit by a truck. And this is in the 60s, when every TV show was, of course the girl's life gets saved, of course love triumphs, of course the hero, certainly the hero is not responsible for an innocent woman being killed. And so, essentially Kirk commits murder, with forethought. And to see that, to see that the message of that episode was, there is a larger good, and you must sacrifice the thing you most dearly love for other people. And that's a profound statement. I mean, if you look at what Martin Luther King was doing, what Gandhi was doing, they're living from that truth that you have to sacrifice everything for the larger good. And even if it's the ultimate sacrifice, you do that. But it was that 1 hour of television that taught me that incredible lesson profoundly, because it had courage. It had emotional courage. It had artistic courage. Or when I saw in Twilight Zone Walking Distance, or Kick the Can, or Eye of the Beholder, or on Outer Limits Soldier, or Demon with a Glass Hand, these are amazing pieces of work. So I started saying, even as a kid, even at 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, okay, who are the guys writing these? I became fascinated with who these guys were. I wanted to meet these guys. I wanted to learn from these guys. And ultimately I did. Harlan Ellison and Ted Sturgeon and Matheson and all these guys became mentors of mine, Bradbury, and I learned from Rod Serling, of course, profoundly. So I take that as a huge responsibility on me as an artist. So when I sit down to write, I'm trying to create something truthful and fresh and original. and I'm very aware that there are many successful people in this industry who don't feel that obligation at all. One of my teachers was Bruce Joel Rubin, who wrote the movie Ghost. He's a wonderful writer, wonderful man, and one of the things he said was, he said, most movies and TV shows, when you ask what they're about, well, like you ask what movies are about, well, most movies are about 2 hours, and that's it. They're not about anything. He said most writers and producers and directors making any film or TV show have no clue what it's about. And so it ends up being about nothing. It's just empty entertainment. And so we watch a TV show or we watch a movie, it's like, okay, well, that was diverting. It was like a movie, it was like, okay, it was a dark room to have popcorn in. But does it change your life? Does it move you profoundly? No. And so you start, as the creative artist, with the decision to do something truthful. So it's not about, I'm going to change the world. It's just about, okay, I have something I want to say, and I'm going to try and say it truthfully and move people. And I've been very lucky to have that experience a number of times. When I did Star Trek New Voyages, World Enough in Time, which people can watch on spacecommandmovie.com in its entirety, that's the Star Trek episode with George Takei that I did without a studio or a network. I showed that with George Takei, and I went to the World Science Fiction Convention in Japan. It was very funny, because I said to George when we were shooting, I said, it was a very hard shoot, and I said, a year from now, you and I are going to be in Japan, we're going to be showing this to an audience of several thousand people, and then we'll answer questions. I'll be answering in English, you'll be answering in Japanese, because he speaks Japanese fluently. And then I said, a year from that, we'll be nominated for the Hugo, which is the top award in science fiction. And that's exactly what happened. Mm-hmm. But to show that on a big screen to an audience of 3,000 people and get a standing ovation with people's tears streaming down their face, to have Japanese guys come up to me in tears saying how much they loved it when they're speaking Japanese, and I still understand what they're saying because they're so moved. And and I was told that Japanese audiences almost never give anything a standing ovation, so that was a huge honor. So I knew that I had taken something from my deepest place in my heart and done my job. And so I'm very proud of that episode, and that's what spurred me to do Space Command. So I'm honored to do the job I do, but I also sense the obligation to do the job I do. I feel a strong obligation to my audience. So, yeah.
So you saw the vision of what would be?
Yes.
You actually sort of saw that in your mind's eye?
Yes. Well, the way it works Okay, here's how writing works. Okay, so whether it's like when I was saying to George that in a year we'll be at Worldcon and then a year after that we'll be nominated for Hugo, or any of this stuff, it's basically you have an idea in your head. So it starts with a creative idea. So it might be, I want to do this big story set in outer space about how we go out into the solar system and then out into the stars, and so you start with that as a notion. Then it becomes, okay, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to get this made? And then it becomes, okay, who am I going to pull together? How am I going to get the money? What are the logistics? Then it's, how am I going to get this out to the world? Because for me, my goal as a writer is to take an emotional truth from my life and communicate it authentically and well to a large audience. And for me, that's hundreds of thousands or millions of people. So for me, just speaking personally, doing something in a 99 seat theater won't serve my objective, because I want to get it out on a big stage. So that's where the internet is so great. You can reach millions of people. So it starts with the idea, then it becomes the execution, then it becomes the distribution. And so previously it was always the studios or networks, but now it can be the internet, it can be video on demand, it can be a lot of other methods. And so I'm enormously grateful that these new technologies have emerged, digital cameras, Final Cut on a Mac, all this stuff. The good part, and this is something I guess I'm proud of myself, is that I'm happy to embrace the new technologies. I'm not, a lot of my friends, they're so enmeshed in the way things used to be that they can't learn the new methods. They can't embrace the new ways of doing things, and so they get stuck where they're dependent on the studios to make their dreams come true. And that's, sometimes it works. I mean, certainly for my friend Rockney O'Bannon, he's got two new shows on network. Great, that's fine. But for most people, it doesn't work, and they're just hitting their head against a wall. And so, again, if you know what you're doing it for, then you can remove a lot of things that aren't serving you. And we'll talk about rejection on the question about the Twilight Zone book, yeah, because we'll talk about, because that's a big one with people being rejected.
And two, I mean, you went back to saying some of your friends have this worldview of sort of the old studio model.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, even in Generation X, Generation Y, have this sort of knight in shining armor approach to their career.
Yeah. In what way? In what way?
In the sense that if we could just have that big break, life will be great, and that people,
yes,
some tastemaker will put a stamp of approval on what we do.
Well, you want the fairy godmother to tap you with the wand. You want it to be easy. And sometimes here we go. Okay, yes. Let's talk about that for a minute, okay? Because I forgot to. Okay. It's wonderful when you have dreams of glory as a creative artist, as a writer, a filmmaker, a director, producer, whatever, and the fairy godmother comes into your life and she taps you with the wand and everything is perfect and everything is easy and you never have to shed a tear. This rarely happens. First of all, and I don't mean to burst your bubble, but fairy godmothers are not real. They're imaginary creations. So, but many of us would love it. It's like, oh my God, if only J.J. Abrams read my script and loved it, and suddenly I'm on top of the world. Right. Now, first of all, because I know a lot of these guys, it ain't like this. It's like this. The whole career is like this. And for like Guillermo del Toro, my dear friend Guillermo, his dream project is a project called At the Mountains of Madness. It's based on a novel by H.P. Lovecraft. He's wanted to make it for 20 years. And last year, or about 2 years ago, James Cameron, right on the heat off of Avatar, said, you still want to make that? Let's make that. And he came aboard as producer. Guillermo spent a couple of years developing it, active development, studio development at Universal. Tom Cruise was slated to star with Ron Perlman, who Guillermo works with often. He starred in Hellboy. It was going to be in 3D. Amazing film. And the studio wouldn't greenlight it. $200 million movie, R rating. No R-rated movie has ever made that much, and they just wouldn't do it. So here's Guillermo del Toro, James Cameron, Tom Cruise. You'd think, of course they're going to say yes. No, heartbreak, and then you just go on to the next project. You just keep going, and maybe that movie will get made, and maybe it won't. And all of us have those projects, those dream projects that don't get made. But if you say to yourself, well, I'm going to go to Kickstarter. I think what's going to inevitably happen ultimately is some guy, some A-list guy, some huge guy is going to come to crowdfunding, is going to come to Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and is going to say, okay, I need $50 million, and that's going to happen. And then the world's going to change. The world is absolutely going to change because I mean, when I was growing up, Orson Welles was still alive, and I always thought that there should be a box on the income tax form that just said, if you want to give $1 to have Orson Welles make a movie, check this box, and then he wouldn't have had to spend the last several decades of his life in frustration never making a movie. He just would have gotten the money to make movies because he was this genius, and we would all be better having these guys making their movies. So, but the point is that for all of us there's rejection, for all of us there's disappointment, and then it just becomes how committed you are to what you're doing, and and again, it goes back to, if you don't need to be rich, if you don't need the studios and the networks, you really have to really look at your dream and say, what is my dream? And if you slice it up into little pieces and you say, okay, wait a minute, do I need this piece of the dream, or is this the piece that I really care about? Because then it allows you to maneuver, and also another thing that we do, all of us, is, like, for instance, Guillermo, he might do one project and that doesn't get realized, but he might take something from that project and put it into another project. For instance, the vampires he developed in Blade 2, he ultimately much more fully realized in The Strain, which was a series of novels that he's done more recently. So, and what I'm doing in Space Command is I'm taking certain elements from various projects and then putting them into the umbrella of this project, simply because they fit, they work, they're great characters or great aliens or whatever. So it's not that you're recycling in any negative way, but you're certainly looking at the things that you care about and making sure they get to the audience.
To stay in the business too, maybe we could tie that in.
Sure, yeah.
Do you want me to lead with the Twilight?
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I really want to talk about Rejection.
Sure, okay.
Because I think for every filmmaker, I mean, most people get bummed out and they stop, and they go home and they live lives of sadness and bitterness. And then they have kids and they take it on their kids, and their kids grow up to be sad, bitter people, and it's generations. It's like So I mean, it's important to remember that Hitler was a frustrated artist. He couldn't get people to buy his paintings, so he ended up becoming this dictator. We don't want that. We don't want any of your people, anyone who sees this, to do that. So I digress. So
no, but I thought it was interesting because you simulate, it's almost like a bipolar ride.
It is. Well,
like
yes, it's but again, it's like, what are you doing it for, and what do you need, and what are you in it for? I mean, we all love to be applauded, and we all have to win and succeed. It's very hard to lose, But let's talk about Rejection.
Yeah, we'll lead into the Twilight. Okay.
Okay, sure, go for it.
Okay. We understand that the Twilight Zone companion was rejected, 25 times?
Yes, over a 2-year period. It was rejected 25 times over a 2-year period, and that's where it's very important to have something called a wife. Because Elaine said to me, just keep going. But also, when something's not working, you have to analyze why it's not working and fix that. Because until you really figure it out, you can't change it. And so what was going on at that point was, my book agent was Rod Serling's book agent. She had been Rod Serling's book agent. So a millionaire agent. She represented Peter Benchley, who was doing Jaws at that time. And so she would submit the book, and the publishers would say, well, we like this, but we don't know how to sell it. We don't know if there's a market for it. And she wouldn't be convincing them. She wouldn't be selling them on it. And also, it would be submitted to an older editor, or an editor who wanted to buy it, but then would have to go to an older publisher who hadn't grown up with the Twilight Zone, who wasn't a fan of the show, and who didn't understand why anyone would read a book about a show that was already off the network. That'd been off the network for over a decade. So I fired her. She was amazed that a little pipsqueak like me would fire her, but I did. And I got another agent, and it was an agent who had been a book editor, but she was starting as an agent. She was hungry, and she was young and aggressive. And she went back to one of the publishers that had rejected it, Bantam. She went to a different editor, a guy named Erwin Applebaum, who was a young, amazing guy, just starting out. But he had the power to buy books. He didn't have to go to anyone for permission. He'd grown up with the Twilight Zone and he loved it, so he bought the book. So the 26th submission, it sold, and it was an instant bestseller, and it's been in print ever since. So, but Rejection is very hard, which is why you need to surround yourself with people who are supportive of you, who will allow you your dream. You must also make sure that your work is solid. If the films have to be good. Most writing is not very good. Most films are not very good. And you have to look at that with a very hard and discerning eye. And if you watch it and you say, well, wait a minute, these actors aren't very good, so maybe I need, as a director, to learn how to work with actors, and maybe I need to go to better actors. Maybe I need to, well, Guillermo tells a great story, because it all boils down to how committed you are to your work. And Guillermo, when he was doing Kronos, first of all, his writing teacher said to him, if a road is not presented, you build one. And Guillermo in Mexico, there was no infrastructure to do the kind of movies he wanted to make. So he spent 10 years building a makeup effects and special effects company as a vendor to others so he could make his first film, Kronos. And then when he was shooting Kronos, there was one shot he wanted, which was the inside of this device with all these gears and this little weird creature in the center of that device. And he had planned to build it where it was about this big, and there'd be a little miniature camera that would, on a little cable that would go and move around in this little thing. And his producer said, "We do not have the money to make that shot. You're going to have to lose that shot." And Guillermo really wanted that shot. So what he did was he sold his van. And he didn't have the money to do that shot, but what he did have the money to was there was a junkyard, and it had these enormous gears from some factory that were the size of a room. And he bought those gears and he painted them gold, and he made this big creature that was like the size of a Volkswagen, and he put it in the middle of those gears, and then he actually had a full-size camera move between those things. So if you ever see that shot, it's supposed to be this big, and it was actually the size of a room. But that was Guillermo willing to sell his van to get that shot. So the question with anything you're doing is, how committed are you to what you're doing? And you have to be very committed. And because you might be rejected 25 times, but it might be the 26th that magic will happen, and doors will open, and a career will be made. And but you also have to be willing to have that happen again and again and again. And anytime you say it shouldn't be this way, what you have to say instead is, it is this way, what am I going to do about it? And that's how it works.
Do you think it's harder to break into the business or maintain the business?
In terms of breaking into the business, I view myself as a burglar working a neighborhood where I have to keep breaking in and breaking in and breaking in. So it's not it's not just once, and it's not like all of a sudden you're through the golden door and you know they're serving you pate. It's basically it's like it's coming up with things, staying fresh, finding the things that excite you, being open to the world, learning new things, telling new stories, not just going over the same material over and over again, recognizing what you love. I mean, Ray Bradbury was very good with that. Everything he loved, he kept. When he was a kid, he was collecting the Buck Rogers newspaper strips, this comic strip, and some kids ridiculed him and he threw out his collection. And he realized he made a terrible mistake. And he spent years building that collection back up. And it was funny because as an adult he was once speaking somewhere like in Big Bear, and someone said to him, I collected those too and I can give them to you if you'd like them. And he got them. And so from him I learned to honor what you love and come from that place and really recognize your own unique qualities, because that's what makes you an individual as an artist. So but again, it's you're going to get knocked back, and your biggest dreams are going to fall to disaster, and there's going to be moments where you're just wandering, as if you've been sucker punched, and and that's again where you must have people who know what they're doing, and you call them, you say, okay, I'm lost here, what do I do? How do I do this? And because you don't go to the people who hire you, and you don't say that to the people who hired you. You say it to the friends you've gathered over the years who know what they're doing. And that's where it's so important to have mentors. And often it can be a two-way street. So for instance, someone might be mentoring me, but there'll be an area that I know how to do that they don't, where I'll say, okay, here's how this works. And so it's very much a two-way street.
Tell us about the talent search for Space Command and using the Kickstarter backers in conjunction with who it will be.
Yeah, well, Kickstarter, I mean, the thing about Space Command is I'm going to be making a series of films, and it's a big, epic story. It takes place over 200 years in our future exploration of the solar system and out into the stars. It's basically about two families, the Kemmer family and the Sikander family, and we go over several generations with them as all these amazing things happen in our future. So it's lots of special effects, big canvas, epic story, and we're jumping at various points. Some of our stories are very far down that timeline, some are closer to our own time, and it's not a linear chronology. It's very much, and so there's going to be a lot of roles. And so I'm casting a lot of my friends, Armin Shimmerman from Deep Space Nine, who I worked with on Deep Space Nine and a lot of other shows, Ethan Phillips, who played Neelix in Star Trek Voyager, and Amber Benson from Buffy, and Doug Jones from Pan's Labyrinth and Hellboy. These are all people that I'm writing roles for. They're playing aliens and androids and all sorts of stuff. And but I also, I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about Kickstarter is very much the public, the audience, the fans are every bit as much of this creative process as we are, and it's very much a two-way street. And I'm not arrogant about that at all. I'm not the big guy on the pillar dispensing wisdom. That's not my role. It's a two-way conversation. I'm enormously grateful whether someone gives me $5,000 or $1. Thank you. They had to earn that money or inherit it, or whether they get to get that money somewhere. I'm grateful. So I was thinking about it. I think, okay, this is participatory, and we've been getting effects people contacting us, and makeup people, and I thought, well, how can I make it as participatory as possible? And there were 2 roles that I hadn't yet cast. I hadn't really plugged any of my friends in on those roles, and I thought, okay, one of them is the lead, Commander Matt Kemmer of the spaceship Paladin, and there was a young member of the crew, Cadet Bradbury, and I actually named that character from the beginning. It was way before Ray passed away, but because this is so inspired by Ray Bradbury's work in Heinlein and Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke, but particularly Ray, I named the character Cadet Bradbury, and so I decided, well, why don't we have anyone in the world can audition for these roles? They can go on the Space Command website. They can pull down scenes that we call them sides to audition with, and they can just put a video on YouTube. It doesn't have to be, like a movie. It can just be them auditioning, and they can put that on YouTube. And our backers on Kickstarter on Space Command can vote, and we'll narrow it down to 5 each, and and then we'll have a second round, and it's just kind of like. And also another thing I'm going to be doing, because certain actors said, well, what about us? We don't fit either of those roles. So I'm actually going to write scenes for a character called Other, and people will be able to audition for that role too, where it's like anybody, any size, any age, any race, anything, they can audition for that if they don't suit the. And also I made Cadet Bradbury non-gender specific, so it can be a male, it can be a female, because again I thought, well, that's fun, that's interesting, and because I'm very inclusive, and I recognize that wonderful, brilliant person. Well, for instance, when I did the Star Trek episode, World Enough in Time, I cast a lead actress from a very successful show, and she was very, very good, and 4 weeks before we were going to shoot, this is after 6 months of building the team, she sat down with me and she said, I've just been told I have to have surgery, I cannot do this role. And I went, white. And that's again where it's very useful to have a wife, because Elaine said, don't worry, we'll have auditions and someone better will come in through that door. And there was an actress named Christina Moses who had never done television, never done film, she only done stage. She'd done stage in New York, and she came in and she auditioned for the role, and I cast her in the lead opposite George Takei, playing George's daughter, and she was the best actress I ever worked with. She's phenomenal. And she's so good that for 2 years I was banging on J.J. Abrams saying, you got to check this actress out, you got to watch this episode. And finally he emailed me and said, you were 2 years ahead of us, you're absolutely right. And he put her on a talent deal, and she was auditioning for the leads in his shows. So that's how amazing that was. And I've cast her in the lead in Space Command 2. So knowing that someone with no TV or film credits could be the most phenomenal actress I've ever worked with, I learned. One thing I try to do is learn from what happens in my life. So I learned that lesson, and that's how the talent search came about. And so I'm thrilled with what's going to happen. It's going to be, and when you talk about that big break and that fairy godmother moment, those don't often happen, but sometimes they do. And when they happen, it isn't just the unknown person where it's a great gift to them. It's a great gift to us, because we get the gift of their talent, themselves, who they are. So that works great. So Comic-Con. Comic-Con is 150,000 people descending on San Diego, and I'm going to be in the middle of it. The people at Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, have been kind enough to give us a panel. We're going to be having a panel. It's going to be actors who we have in the show. It's going to be the producers, the directors, the writers. It's going to be me, of course. It's going to be, in fact, there's even going to be an executive from Kickstarter on the panel with us, talking about Kickstarter. It's going to be, she's flying in from New York, and it's going to be great, and we'll be able to meet our fans and talk to them. We're going to also show some footage that we've never shown before. We're going to unveil some exclusive footage at Comic-Con, and then the next day we're going to be doing a signing where we're going to have an exclusive poster that we're going to be signing to a whole bunch of people, and we're going to be wearing our Space Command t-shirts and and going to town, and we're going to have a party where we're going to have the countdown, because our Space Command Kickstarter campaign ends Saturday night, midnight New York time, 9 p.m. our time. So we're going to have a countdown. We're going to have all of our friends there and all of our fans who want to come, and we're going to be in a big room, and we're going to be cheering and shouting and looking to see how high that number gets. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell your grandma, and it's going to be great.
What's the exact date?
The date is, the panel is July 13th, Friday, July 13th, room 5A and B. It's 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. and our campaign ends the next day, Saturday, July 14th. Saturday, July 14th, 9 p.m. Pacific time, midnight Eastern time, and it's going to be great.
And did you schedule, I mean, did you plan your campaign around Comic-Con?
Yes.
Did you know that was going to be part of?
We started our campaign on Coast to Coast, which is this radio show that I go on every few months, and it has a huge listenership of 5 million people.
George Norrie.
Right, George Norrie. And we've actually cast him in Space Command. He's going to play a character, which is there. He told me that someone said he would be reincarnated as a talk show host named Dexter Monterey, so we've actually put that character in Space Command. So it's going to be great fun. And so we started with that, and then we're ending with Comic-Con. So the idea was to anchor the campaign at the beginning, at the end. So, because again, it's, you know, what's going to get attention, what's going to get noticed, what's going to bang the drum. Because I feel enormously confident. Look, if I weren't doing Space Command, I would be thrilled to be watching Space Command. It would be something. I mean, you know, I was first in line to see Prometheus. I know what I am, and I know there's millions of people like me, and so. You know, so I'm thrilled to be creating something that's exciting to me and to millions of people, and you know, and then it's just an obligation of doing it, because the challenge is doing it for a low number. You know, $100,000 sounds like a lot of money to anyone, but to make a movie, let alone a series of films, it's a challenge. And if I didn't have the friends I have, who are geniuses at special effects, geniuses at production, genius actors, you know, it's because of the people I know that makes me confident I can do this. You know, if I was just starting out, I would never attempt something like this. It would be impossible to deliver something with this amount of effects and this scope on this budget. No, but I know I can do it because I know what I've done and I know who my friends are. So it's cool.
It seems like you've been almost waiting your whole life for this project to sort of manifest.
I have. I mean, everything I've done, all the hundreds of hours of television, all the books, all the everything, all the people I've met. You know, it's very gratifying to me that Damon Lindelof and Guillermo and all of these dear friends and you know, showrunners and A-list people are in favor of what I'm doing and backing what I'm doing. Brandon Braga just said that he wants to donate to our campaign. Brandon comes off Star Trek and 24 and you know, Terra Nova. You know, these are friends, but it's very nice to see their faith in me because they have confidence that I can pull this off. And frankly, I do too. You know, it's that's the other part of it. I wouldn't undertake this if I didn't know if I could do it and do it wonderfully. And so I'm chomping at the bit. I can't wait. And we're not waiting. I'm writing the scripts and we're building sets and building spacesuits. And you know, Ian McCaig, who designed Darth Maul and Queen Amidala, is aboard, and he's designing aliens and characters. And so there was never a question whether we would do this or not. The only thing that I didn't know is if we could raise the money on Kickstarter. But I was determined to make this regardless. You know, if it was a matter of, you know, doing it on, you know, getting a job at a restaurant and taking tips and, you know, making it off tips, you know, whatever works, you know. And we were going to make this no matter what. And I'm so grateful to everyone who's helping us make it.
And you've brought on a social media?
Yes. Yeah, well, we have a whole team of people who are doing wonderful things for us. And so you know, Leah is helping us, and David Raiklin and Justin, and there's a team of people, EJ, and you know, and just many people on our team. You know, Doug Drexler, and Neil Gaiman are, you know, and it's like every department someone has shown up who's just spectacular, and you know, and the more the merrier. You know, if someone comes with a good heart and the ability to do something, yes, it takes an army, and you know, they say it takes a village, but it's a village that knows stuff, and you can't do it alone. It's impossible. If I was a novelist sitting in a room, I could at least write novels, and I need fewer people. But with film and TV, no, it takes a ton of people. You know, and a lot, and you know, but that's great. People are eager to help. Yeah, I'm very grateful to everyone.
And what is the process you go through in terms of finding these people and getting them involved?
I use my hypno-ray. It's like this big turning wheel, and they just kind of come with his glassy eyes. No, it's what I do is, for many years, for 19 years, I've been running a round table of writers and directors and actors and producers and composers and novelists. It started 19 years ago when my friends were feeling bummed out in Hollywood, and they were just isolated and sad and depressed. And I realized that I could either do something about it or just complain. And I decided I was going to do something about it. So I started a round table where we'd meet every Thursday, so people wouldn't have to remember which Thursday. We'd meet at a restaurant, and we would go around the table, and everyone would have about 5 minutes to talk about what they were doing, and we would then hook them up with whatever they needed. And everyone would be treated the same. Whether they were Oscar winners or just starting out, they would be treated with the same amount of respect. And there'd be no judgment as the project. I mean, if someone wanted someone to read a script and give notes, fine. But no one would ever say, "Oh, well, you're stupid to be doing a Western," or you know, or that's a silly idea. That would not be allowed, because it's not judgment of the material ever, unless someone asks for it. So it started with 6 people, and now it's several thousand. And we have offshoots in New York, Dallas, Phoenix, San Francisco, Santa Barbara, one starting in London, one starting in New Orleans. And so you can send one email out, it goes out to all 1,000+ members. And we've thrived and we've benefited from each other. So it started with me just putting out the word to the table and to my friends in the industry and starting to build it. It started with Neil Johnson and Doug Drexler, my friends who are science fiction directors, and Doug's a special effects guy from Galactica. And then I just started looking at people who would show up. But you also look for talents. So for instance, David Raiklen is our composer, but it turned out he was a genius in helping design our campaign. And so when I saw that he was brilliant at it, it's like, okay, you want to be a co-producer, you're promoted. You know, so and then other people would show up, and then you start to see who's just talking and not delivering versus who's actually doing it. And the only thing you do is make course corrections very quickly, because it's a 2-month campaign. You can't wait for 6 months down the road to see if someone's done the thing that they said they were going to do. And but our team is, there are people in their 70s helping us. There are people who are kids who are in their teens helping us, and all aboard, you bet. It's fun that they're all welcome on the spaceship set.
You have an interesting perk that...
Yes. Well, the fun thing about Kickstarter is you have perks, and so people can pledge as low as $1, and be part of our team. And Kickstarter allows you to go up to $10,000, so people get walk-ons in the movie, all sorts of stuff, and watches and jackets and you name it, books and photos and posters. But we also designed on our website perks that go from $15,000 up to $500,000, and it was very fun designing those rewards. And when we got up to $250,000, there's a very fun thing, which is one of the inspirations for Space Command is a great TV show called Space Patrol that was on from 1950 to 1955, live television. And I actually met the star of that show, Ed Kemmer, who was quite wonderful, a wonderful man. And I met the head writer, Norm Jolly. And they had the best contest ever, which was to the kid who named the 10th planet, Planet X. The winner of that contest got a full-size copy of their spaceship. It was a 35-foot-long spaceship made out of steel and aluminum, delivered on a flatbed truck. It was bigger than the kid's parents' house. Okay, the 10-year-old who won it. And so in honor of that contest, at $250,000, someone will get our entire spaceship set. It'll be delivered on a flatbed truck to the winner. But then we think, well, what can we do to beat that? Well, $500,000. What could someone get for $500,000? $500,000. And we said, okay, here we go. First of all, they get a red carpet premiere in their hometown, so they can invite all their friends. Plus, they get an actual trip into space, a real trip. So there are a number of carriers now offering an actual trip into space, legitimate carriers, and so they'll get a ticket on one of those spaceships. So that's pretty cool. So if someone's just sitting around the house thinking about what to do with that $500,000 that they don't need, please, go on to our Space Command website and rock and roll.
Marc, you were able to raise $75,000 on Kickstarter in 3 days for your Space Command project. What was your strategy when you launched this campaign, and then what did you find worked and what did you find did not work?
Well, I've sold over 100 scripts, all to the studios and the networks, and in those cases I didn't have to raise the money. For instance, when I was a producer on Sliders, we had a 22-episode order. Our budget was $1.3 million per episode. I didn't have to raise that money. So although I knew I could write, and I know I can write and direct and produce, I'd never raised funds before. I didn't know if I would succeed. So the first thing I did was I treated it as something new I had to learn. And I spent several months talking to people, learning how to do it, building a team, shooting the video, and really putting effort into the video, because that would be what I'd be using to show I could do the project. And but I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if I could raise money at all. And now we're up to $158,000. We still have several weeks, a number of weeks to go. We're going to be having a panel at Comic-Con. So 158 is not our final number by any means. And so what I basically did was I realized I had to treat it with respect. And but I welcomed that. I welcomed learning a new thing, but I had no assumption that I would succeed. And going in with that attitude actually was very helpful, because then it became a continual learning process. And the main thing I also knew was that you had to be in direct communication day by day with your backers, with your audience. You couldn't it's not pushing the big red button and then walking away. That's I think why a lot of people fail.
Did you research other campaigns? What was your sort of due diligence?
Yeah. Yeah, well, fortunately, I run a roundtable of writers and directors and actors and producers, and we meet every Thursday, and we've been doing that for 19 years, and it's several thousand people. And so I put out the word to my table saying, if anyone knows about Kickstarter, please send me information. So I got a lot of response, and so I started researching successful campaigns like Double Fine and some of the things Neil Gaiman was doing, and then ultimately Neil showed me the campaign that his wife Amanda Palmer was doing. And so I was learning from that, and then just kind of course correcting as I went. And some things you do don't work, and some things you do work. And then also you build a team. And so when someone shows up who wants to help, first of all you find out what their skills are, and then you say, okay, well, let's see if they're actually going to do it rather than just talk about doing it. And what's really also amazing is how fast everything is. There's instantaneous response. And so it could be a 24/7 job if you let it, but you also have to not get exhausted because you have to keep a clear head to be able to do your job.
How much time went into pre-planning?
It's a couple months, 2 or 3 months, yeah. And that was both shooting the video and also just reading up on Kickstarter, talking to people, learning. And but also, we actually launched about a month later than we intended, simply because we had to make some further tweaks, and we were refining the project. Because also, that's the other part of it, you're also working on the project as well, the series of films, and you're developing, the concept builds and grows, and people will give you input, and then you're responsive to that. It really is a very direct two-way conversation.
Now the video is excellent.
Thanks.
And I'm wondering how much time you put into planning that, because you have so many elements in it. You have the personal element where we meet you and other people in your ensemble, but then you also have the fun stuff in the background, and all of the other work that you've done.
Well, it was we put a couple months in on the video, and part of it, one thing I recognized with Kickstarter that was very, very clear, is that you have to have the personal touch. It's the person, the individual saying, hi, this is who I am, I really would like your help. It's usually one person, whether it's Double Fine or Amanda Palmer, it's usually the one-on-one. And fortunately, I was a commentator on Morning Edition for 3 years, long ago, and I've done a lot of media interviews, and so I'm very comfortable with that, and I think that helped. But also, in my campaign, it was me as a person, but it was also, this is the body of work I've done, and then the third part is, this is the team I've assembled, and it's an amazing team, and then it was the special effects shots that we were generating fresh, saying this is what we're doing is going to look like. So it wasn't just, you can look at our work from the past, but there's no telling what we're going to do now. Here's something very concrete that we generated new, specific to this project, and that was very important, because otherwise, people are going to be dubious. But if you say, okay, look at this, if you like this, if you like these effect shots, if you like these actors who we're going to be casting, then you get a pretty good idea about what we're up to.
How did you choose your incentives?
That took a long time. In terms of choosing the incentives, we looked at other campaigns, we thought about ourselves as geeks and what we'd like. Because when I was a kid, Star Trek debuted, the original Star Trek, and I was a huge Star Trek fan. And they were very slow in terms of merchandising products from Star Trek initially. There were very few, and I longed for different, model kits and action figures and toy phasers and all that stuff. So I was just kind of thinking about me as a fan, and what would appeal to me, and what would I like to have, and what would be interesting. And it was a mixture of several things, because I was thinking about the different kind of people who would be pledging to Space Command. And so there would be the fans who are just science fiction fans. They'd love to be part of this and maybe get a Space Command watch or a Space Command jacket. Then there were also the people who might be visual effects people, and maybe they want to be part of the team, or they want to learn from what we're doing. So there's also the how-to aspect. So I actually posted something called the 1 Minute Film School that's about how you pitch a script, how you write a movie, how you direct a movie, with my friends and like Guillermo del Toro and my friend Michael Nankin, who directs Battlestar Galactica, in these videos, talking about those things. And then there's another part of it that might be aspiring actors who might want to be part of the project. So they might want to walk on role or a speaking role. Or there might be someone who wants to have a producer credit, and so they can put money in and get a producer credit. So I was thinking about the different reasons that someone might be interested and how they might want to participate. And those are different sort of pie wedges of the whole pie, and so you have to be mindful of that as well. That it's not one size fits all.
You talk about how, when you mentioned earlier, things hit critical mass and just sort of the things align, and
yes,
a momentum builds around a project.
Yes. Well, it starts with doing the work, but the work has to be of high quality. But you have to put it out into the world and you have to find people who are on your wavelength. But the fun part is that there are people, if you're doing work that has honesty and is well made and has and communicates what you're trying to communicate, there are people all up and down the food chain in Hollywood, from people who are kind of marginal to people who are incredibly successful, who will resonate to your work, who will respond to it. The challenge is then getting it in front of them. And so it's very important, in addition to doing the work, to target the people who are doing work that you admire. I always suggest to people that they make a list of 100 writers, directors, actors, producers, even studio executives who are doing the work that they most admire. So for instance, if you see a TV show and you like it, add those names to your list. Then, particularly if you're in Los Angeles or New York or any of the major cities, but particularly LA, show that list to your friends and say, if you see these people, any of these names, giving talks, appearing on panels, let me know. Because then you can go to those places and you can talk to those people and you can meet them and you can start to establish connection. And then they get to be curious about you. And then if you say, well, I've done this feature, it's one of the great rules of Hollywood is that everybody hates to read. So a script is a very quiet and a very obnoxious object. So it's like, oh, do I really have to read that script? But if you say, I've made a film, it's much easier, or even if it's short, where people can just put it in the DVD player or click it, online or whatever. They can watch it. They can have an immediate experience. It's a much better commercial for you as a creative artist than just a script. And I speak as someone who's actually sold a lot of scripts, I have hundreds of hours of produced credits, so I've been successful pitching scripts, selling scripts, all that stuff, but I much favor making the thing itself. Because when you make the thing itself, it's such a better advertisement for you, first of all, and secondly, you're no longer auditioning, you're actually creating the work. But you can't just create the work and expect the work magically to find its audience. So that's where you have to do the heavy lifting. But the cool part is that thanks to the internet, everyone is checking stuff out. And the moment, it's very permeable. So the moment someone who's a buddy of J.J. Abrams emails J.J. and says, oh, you gotta check this out, he will. It has to be someone he knows. But then you never know, if you just start putting out in the world to the people you know, there's gonna be a ripple effect. And even with Space Command, that's what's been happening, where people know about it, people have heard about it. And it's just, so then it's just really recognizing that part of your job is creating the work and part of your job is getting the work out there. And most artists don't want to do that second part. They think, oh, it's hard, I don't want to do that, particularly writers. It's like, I want to sit in my room and type and I don't want to talk to people. Tough. Either get a partner who's very outgoing or learn those skills, because it is a very frustrating life to write scripts endlessly and have them go nowhere. And so you should not allow that to be acceptable in your career, in your life. And so you have to be the guy that pushes the rock up the mountain. And it's funny, a couple years ago I made a Star Trek episode without a studio or network. It was called Star Trek New Voyages, World Enough in Time. And it starred George Takei, and it was a full hour-long episode. We made it in 2007, 2008, got nominated for the Hugo and the Nebula. And but it was very difficult, and my mantra to myself while I co-wrote it and directed it and executive produced it, and my mantra to myself while I was making it was, I am made of iron and nothing will stop me. And I found that I needed to really live by that to get that made. And so if you take something like that on, and if you're determined to get to the finish line no matter what, then it simply becomes a question of, how do I do this? How do I make it possible? Who do I need to affiliate with? What do I need to remove that isn't necessary? And you have to be very clear on what you're trying to accomplish, because most people get stopped, most people get stuck, most people go nowhere, and you have to have a very keen eye as to what the problem is to be able to fix it. So that's part of it.
In terms of people not going places,
yes.
Let's suppose someone's pitching a script,
yes.
And let's say they're in their 30s, they have a literary agent, they know that they're talented,
yes.
And they've written half a dozen scripts, they've won screenwriting contests, they've made the rounds, yet nothing's caught on.
Right, that happens a lot.
Yeah, and they're still not making a living as a writer. What would you tell this person?
Become a brain surgeon. I mean, no, it's seriously, that happens a lot. And then it becomes a question of how committed, well, first of all, what are you trying to accomplish, and how committed are you to accomplishing it? Because you have to be clear on if your goal is to get rich and famous or if your goal is to do meaningful work. I personally, in my career and in my life, I favor the latter as an objective. Because if your goal is to get rich and famous, well, then what you need to do is find people who've gotten rich and famous and have them mentor you, because it's a recipe and you need to follow it. So that's one part of the answer. But the other part of the answer is, if your goal is to do meaningful work, then get a Canon 5D, learn Final Cut on a Mac, make the work. Go to science fiction conventions, meet science fiction actors. If you want to do science fiction movies, they're very accessible. Go to film festivals and meet actors who aren't science fiction actors. Meet actors, befriend them, get them to be in your project, but make the project for the lowest possible number that you can make it for while still having it be of quality. And so that's where you need to meet people who have the skill sets that you need. You have to have good sound, absolutely. You have to have a picture that looks good, you still get a good DP. But there's tons of those people. But on the other hand, if you want to play the studio game and sell to the studios and climb that ladder and make millions of dollars, the way you do that is you move to LA, you go to every event you can where someone you admire is speaking. You go to the Writers Guild events, you go to the events at the American Cinematheque and the DGA, you learn your craft, you get good at writing. You have people read your script and give you notes who are professional screenwriters, not screenwriting teachers. It's very important when you're getting notes from someone to ask yourself, have they ever written and sold a script? If they haven't, then how are you going to learn what you need to learn to have a successful career if you're learning it from someone who's never done it? I mean, it's possible you can learn that, but it's much harder. So for instance, one thing I advise people, people can hire me to read scripts and give notes, that's fine, but they can also reach out. If you had 10 of your favorite screenwriters, you could write them care of the Writers Guild. You just put on the envelope, please forward. The forward letters, don't send a whole bunch at a time, but send one at a time. And you say to that writer, you send these one at a time. Let's say you choose 15 of your favorite screenwriters. And you say, I've written a screenplay, I'd like to pay you $1,000 to read it and give me notes. I promise you, one of them will say yes, because they are never offered money to read scripts. They are always having people wanting to read scripts for free. The reason you don't send all 15 at once is if you get 15 yeses, you're out 15 grand. But the point is, let's say you get some A-list screenwriter to read your script and give you notes. If he responds to it and he likes it, amazing things can happen. So, but don't require that. Don't have that be an expectation. Because even if he just gives you notes, you're miles ahead. He just has to be someone who's writing in a genre that's similar to yours, or writing in a tone that's similar to yours, so he's going to get what you're up to. But that's what I would recommend, because some of the screenwriting teachers are good, some of the screenwriting gurus, but a lot of them, are just going on guesswork, or they're throwing up a lot of rules. Basically, I feel that the more rules someone lays down in terms of what a script needs to be, the less they know what they're doing, because in reality, when you get really good at writing, you hear the music, and structure becomes second nature. It's like the bones of a house. You're building a house. You know how a house has to stand. The bigger the story, the more elaborate the bones of the house. But that becomes almost second nature. It's like breathing, and then it's just finding the truth of the story, having the characters be alive. It's as I said, it's hearing the music. It's not like, oh, by page 7 I need to have this happen, and by page 12 I need this to happen. The structure basically is simply you start with someone who has a problem, you get them in the deepest shit possible. If it's a happy ending, they get themselves out of it. If it's a tragedy, they fail to. That's structure. And you can also study movies that you love and take them apart. You can you can record them on audio and listen to it, and that helps you analyze it better. You can listen to a movie to analyze the writing. You can turn the sound off and watch a movie to analyze the directing, and see how it works as a series of shots and movement within those shots. So those are two things that I do.
In terms of finding this person of influence that you want to have look at your work, or you want to make contact with, I think there's a fine line in LA. So many people are being pitched. How aggressive do you get? Because you don't want to turn the person off. No.
And one person a writer was once asked, when do you take no for an answer? And he said, when they call security. So, but I don't really subscribe to that. The real answer is, first of all, treat people the way you would want to be treated. So don't be a jerk. For one thing, you have no idea how many people in various circumstances will jam me up against a wall and start pitching their story to me. It's like, Mr. Zicree, you have to hear this. Okay, fade in. We open on the sky, and we see clouds. We're panning down, we see birds, and we're panning down, we see a spire, and it's the Empire State Building, and we're down at 102nd floor, 101st floor, oh God. no. Please, no. And first of all, when you're pitching, never pitch every beat, every shot, no. It's the broad strokes. But also, you shouldn't be pitching, is that person buying stories? Why are you pitching to them? What's in it for them? It's like, but also, no one likes to be pitched in a, in a social circumstance, or if they're giving a talk, it's like, do I really want to stand here and listen for 20 minutes to someone's story that I've known from the first minute is awful? No. What you want to do is always first of all, if you go to an event and someone who you admire is speaking, you remember the rule of three. The rule of three is, most people make the mistake of immediately pitching or immediately, I'm an actor, you gotta cast me, here's my headshot, here's my reel. No, you have not established a relationship with that person. So the first time you meet them at an event, you just say something truthful, maybe about their work, but it has to be specific. It has to be, there was that scene in that movie you did where the little boy was talking to his mother, and I had this really difficult relationship with my mother, and when I saw that scene, it opened a door in me somehow, and I went and had a conversation with my mom, and it changed our relationship. That's something that's going to resonate. That's something truthful and meaningful from your heart. But don't gush and don't go on at length, okay? Because there's going to be other people who want to talk to this guy. The other part, so then you go to a second event with that person. And if you have a chance at the end to talk to them again, say, oh, hi, Mr. So-and-so. Last time when we spoke, and I told you about my mom, and you said such and such. It really meant so much to me that you really cared. Or you say something again. It's like, and I just want to let you know how much that meant to me, right? Okay. Then you go to the third event. The third event, you run into them and say, oh gosh, we keep running into each other. It's like we're swimming in the same aquarium. And it's like, it's so, you've been so kind talking to me these last two times, and there's something you said last time we talked, and I really applied it, and it really, I made this film, or blah, 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 whatever. Then you say, also, I read in the trades that you're looking for a Western, and, and based on these conversations we've been having, I just thought, I don't know if you'd be open to it, but I've written a Western, and I'd love to have my representation send it to you if you'd be open to that. Or, whatever the request is, but you say it in a very respectful manner, you don't go on at length, you stop at yes, or if he says no, that's fine, you let it go. But the point is, by then, he's already gotten a sense that you're not a jerk because you didn't push the button at the first moment. And secondly, he's gotten enough about you where he's intrigued about you. So that's the way you do it. Or that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, by the way, is if you go to any event where, like, let's say J.J. Abrams is talking at the event. Now everyone's going to try and zone in on J.J., but his people are going to be in that first row. Okay, any of these bigwigs, okay? And if you Google who their partners are, and Google image what those people look like, you know what those people look like. So instead of trying to talk to JJ, you try to talk to his right-hand guy, or James Cameron, you talk to his right-hand guy, because they're, for one thing, they'll admire the fact that you've done your homework, so you know who they are. But again, it's always treat people with respect, always treat people like you'd want to be treated. It's not about the fast hustle. It's not about, oh my God, I'm going to pitch this and they're going to love it and they're going to buy it. No. You're building a career, and a career is made out of relationships, and a career is about doing the work. And what gains respect is if you, let's say you meet someone like Brian Burke, who's JJ's partner, and you say, and you do your research, so you know a little bit about them, and you say, I read that your first, the first short you ever produced was about, a boy who had a wooden leg, whatever, it doesn't matter. And you say, Brian Burke, it's funny, I looked up that short online, and it was just so moving. And a friend of mine, when he was a kid, is, terrible train accident, he lost his legs, and he's become a decathlon athlete, and I'm doing this little piece about him, and it's just, and you really inspired me. So Brian Burke will say, wow, that's really great. The next time you see Brian Burke, you say, you were so encouraging last time we spoke, and I've actually finished the short, and I'd love to send it to you. Well, the fact that you said you were going to do something and then you did it, and I'm not talking about Brian Burke, please don't everyone reach out to Brian Burke, but the fact you did, 99.9% of people in this town or in this industry, they say they're going to do something and they never do it. Which is why, if you have a screenplay and the money isn't attached or the actors aren't attached, that's why they blow you off. Because most stuff never gets anywhere. And so why should they put more effort in your project than you're going to put in your project? But if you actually do it, let's say you make that documentary and it's great, then they will becoming interested in you, and then they want to help you because they see that you're serious. And everything in my career has been about saying I'm going to do something and then doing it. I'm very strong on that. I'm very firm on that. In my own career, I'm very hard on myself and very committed. But that then establishes that you have integrity. And once people get that, integrity and authenticity are very important. And once people see you've got that, they trust you to a certain degree, and then they'll help you. So it works that way.
You mentioned in previous videos that, breaking into film and television is really not that difficult.
No.
As long as you know what you're doing and you apply yourself with dedication and consistency.
Yes.
So going back to that same thing and of keeping your commitment not only to others but to yourself, what is dedication and consistency to you, even on a daily basis? What does that look like?
Discipline is very important. My mom, I was raised by a single mom, and at one point one of her boyfriends was a retired spy who was also a writer. And he said one of the best things I ever heard about writing, he said, in terms of writing, he said, an amateur can rely on inspiration, a professional needs discipline. That's absolutely true. And so minimally 5 days a week, often 6 days a week, I'm working, and even on Space Command it's almost 24/7 now, and where I'm just kind of it's my job, and I love it, but I also treat it seriously. I'm a writer and I have to write, and if I'm also producing and directing, I have to do those jobs, and I'm not looking for someone else to do the hard part. I'm doing the hard part, and but beyond that, I also study successful people whom I admire, and a big part of my conversation with those people is how they divide their day. And so, for instance, Ray Bradbury, who was a dear, dear friend and a very good, very wonderful mentor for many, many years, dearly missed, I found out his writing schedule was 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. He would write for 3 hours in the morning, then he would have lunch and take a nap, and then do business in the afternoon, the business around his writing career, and then evenings and weekends were for his family. And he did that for 80 years, so 75 years, and it worked really well. And so that's the best writing schedule of anyone I know. But when you're a writer, producer, director, it divides up differently. So for instance, I'm not writing nearly as much as I normally would be because I'm running the Space Command campaign. But because I see that the job is getting those films made, it's not about me clocking pages every day. It's about getting the films made. I'm clear on what my job is. But also, the moment you say, if no one picked me, how would I still get to the finish line? You're free. Because then you don't need anybody to say yes. You just figure out how to do it yourself. And 5-10 years ago, that would have been much harder. In the old days, if you were shooting on 35mm or 16mm, making a feature would cost millions of dollars. You'd be editing on a moviola, and distribution would be a nightmare because it's like the studios and networks have all that stuff locked up. If you want to reach an audience of millions, good luck if you don't have those guys aboard. Now it's a totally different ballgame. You can, part of Space Command was my goal since I was 13 years old was to be a showrunner on my own science fiction show. I was just thinking to myself the other day, how can I what's the fastest route to doing that? And I thought, well, I can remove the studios and networks, I can remove the middleman and go directly to that. And that's why I've been doing this on Kickstarter, because I don't need them. And I don't consider them the enemy, but if I don't need them, if I don't need to be wealthy, if I don't need to be making millions, that liberates me. I'm free. I keep my overhead very low. I've earned millions as a writer, but I'm not ruled by money. And because of that, I don't need to do work I don't want to do. It's free. I'm free. And so in terms of getting a career in film and TV, writing a lot and getting better and better and better and making sure your work is solid is vital. Getting feedback from people who really know what they're talking about is vital. Getting people to consider your work, to look at your work, banging the drum for yourself is vital, but doing it in a way that's... It's funny, I had lunch a little while ago with Nicholas Meyer, who directed Wrath of Khan, wonderful writer-director, and he said the way you have a career in this industry is charm with persistence. And he's absolutely right. Or you could say persistence with charm, either way. But the point is you're an absolute squeaky wheel for yourself, but in a charming way. So people don't think, gee, what an asshole. You don't want them to be saying that about you. There's some really horrible alpha dogs in this industry who are very successful, but if you can do things with grace and consideration. The single most polite person I know is J.J. Abrams. His manners are impeccable, astonishing. He's so considerate. He's such a great guy. And so if he can be on top of the food chain, then it means you don't have to be a jerk to make it in this town. Guillermo del Toro, with whom I'm doing a book, is a wonderful guy. Big heart. It's just wonderful. And, so that's how I run my life too. I want to really be talking in detail about having a career in film and television because the big difference between having a career in film and television with the studios and the networks versus having a career as an independent filmmaker or making your own web series is simply the difference between wealth and poverty, financial wealth and poverty, because the studios and the networks have the money, and if you're in the Writers Guild or the DGA, there are minimums, guaranteed minimums, and you'll earn a lot more money, and that's great. Wealth is very nice. Having a lot of money is very nice, but so in terms of cracking that, it's just you must meet these people face to face. You must go where they are. And because if you're in East McKeesport, Pennsylvania, or in Connecticut, or in the Bay Area, you're just not going to run into these people. They're here in Los Angeles. So the first step is you move here and you meet as many people as you can possibly meet, and you learn how to say in one sentence the thing that legitimizes you. So and by the way, every studio and network has a fellowship, a writing fellowship. You can enter those. Most of them are for free. The Nichols Fellowship, also, all the studios and networks and agencies monitor those. If you win those, it's a big step in getting a career. If you win the ABC Disney Fellowship, they give you $50,000 and a career. So that's the thing I would advocate for everybody. It's much better now than it used to be. When I was writing The Twilight Zone Companion, I saw a photo of the crew. And first of all, they were all in suit and tie, which I thought was very amusing for a crew. And but secondly, they were all white males, with the one exception of the script girl, who was a white female. And now you can be African American, you can be a female and be a showrunner. You can, yes, Hollywood is ageist and racist and sexist, but it's better than it used to be. It just is. So, and also, by the way, anytime you encounter those kind of problems, you don't get defeated by them. You just say, okay, I'm going to get around that wall, over that wall, under that wall. I'm going to break through that wall. I was going to say it's irrelevant. It's not. It's relevant. It's an impediment, but it shouldn't stop you, because there are plenty of people who succeed despite those things, and so that's a big part of it too.
Well, also too, you started out writing in your early 20s and being paid, right? So you were.
Well, my first short story I sold when I was 19. And I was having gallery shows of my artwork and photography when I was a teenager. So, and my first radio play I wrote when I was 18, and it aired when I was 18. So I was pretty fast out of the gate. So, and I was writing my first book at 22, The Twilight Zone Companion, and I was writing for TV by the time I was 22 or 23. Yeah.
How was that, being so young? Did you have certain?
It was great.
Oh, it was. Okay. So
yeah, it was swell. It was I was very lucky because. When I was a kid, The Twilight Zone and Star Trek and Outer Limits, the original versions of those shows, were the things that made me want to be a writer, particularly a television writer. When I was 13, I read a book called The Making of Star Trek. It was the first book I ever read about how to make a TV show. And the first writer I ever saw in person was Ray Bradbury. He spoke at a library when I was 10. So all of these things started percolating in my mind. And when I was a kid, I also got a visit. As a Christmas present, I was given a visit to the Star Trek set. And so I was there for the filming of the last episode of the original Star Trek. I was on the Enterprise sets, which was just great. And so I sort of had a sense of calling. I knew I would be an artist or a writer from a very early age. I was drawing and writing and reading science fiction voraciously, and comic books, and watching TV and going to movies. So I was very lucky in that way. And so, and I also because I saw that Ray Bradbury and Rod Serling were writing books and movies and TV shows, I had that sense that you could go between all three, and that was very useful too. And one thing that Ray said to me is it's very important to do all three, particularly keep writing books, because then they can't own you, and no single rejection can stop you. So Ray had a lot of movies he wrote that never got made. I have the script of The Martian Chronicles that Ray wrote for MGM in 1963. It was going to be the movie that Gregory Peck and Robert Mulligan were going to do right after To Kill a Mockingbird. It's a great script, and it never got made. And I've got an original copy of that signed by Ray, and which I read in little tiny pieces every day at lunch when I was a producer on Sliders, just to kind of take as long as possible to read this wonderful script. It was great.
Well, you mentioned Ray Bradbury being one of your mentors.
Yes.
Who were some of your other mentors? And in terms of, you said you observe people, and you're very good at that. What did you actually observe of these mentors that maybe they didn't articulate to you, what you saw as being secrets to their success?
Yes. Well, I think two of the things that, okay, here's the reason I'm a professional writer as opposed to someone sitting in a bar all day long bitter and saying, kind of pointing at the TV and going, those shows, I should have been writing for those shows, Hollywood sucks, I hate everything. I could have been that guy. I still might be, the day is young. But what it was when I was 16, My mother went to Sears and bought this really weird piece of furniture that was a table with 2 beds that would go in at right angles to each other. You tuck them under the table, and then you could pull them out to sleep on. It was the weirdest damn thing. I have no idea why she bought it. She put it in the living room of our apartment. But it also had an AM/FM radio built into that table. And we'd had AM radios, but never FM radios. And so one night when I was 16, I started twirling the dial at about 10 at night on a Friday, and I started hearing something amazing, which was science fiction writers talking about their craft. And it was a radio show called Hour 25. And for the first time, I started hearing all the writers I'd grown up reading, Robert Heinlein and Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke and Ray Bradbury and Theodore Sturgeon, all these great science fiction writers, and Harlan Ellison talking about writing. And many of them had written for Star Trek, Ted Sturgeon and Harlan and Richard Matheson, and I started hearing them talk about writing. And Harlan was talking about a science fiction writing workshop called the Clarion Writers Workshop. And it was the leading science fiction writing workshop in the country. And it was 6 weeks long, 25 students at Michigan State University in the summer, and each week a different famous science fiction writer would live with you in the dorms, and you would write like crazy and critique each other's stories. And I thought, I want to go to that. So even though I was an art student at UCLA, I got enrolled in the art school by mistake. It was a clerical error. I never applied to that major, but I got a degree in it because I was, why not? That's another story. But when I was 19, I went to Clarion, and it was 6 very famous science fiction writers, and I sold my first short story. But I also learned from those writers, and the main thing I learned was that they were just like me, that if they could do it, I could. It was Roger Zelazny, Samuel R. Delany, Joe Haldeman, Kate Wilhelm, Damon Knight, Gene Wolfe, and Damon Knight, one of the students asked him, which of us do you think will make it as professional writers? And he should not have answered that question, but he did. And he named several, and they all became very, very famous writers. And I was one of the ones he thought would not make it. And the next day he bought my first short story for an anthology he was editing, which taught me, first of all, that no one can predict your future. No one has a right to rob you of your future. And he could not look into my secret soul and see how determined I was. He could not look into my heart. And he couldn't even predict the future 24 hours ahead. And so my point is that if someone says something negative to you, if they say you're never going to make it as a writer, say 4 words to them that will get them to go away. And those 4 words are, you're the Antichrist. And they'll go away, because no one has a right to take away from you. All they can say is, I read your script, and from my point of view, this is where it's not working. That's all they can say. They have no right to say anything else. But so from meeting those professional writers, I sold my first short story. That was $50. So my first sale was $50. My next sale was $20,000, and that was for the Twilight Zone companion. That was the advance. And but then when I got back to UCLA, Ted Sturgeon, Theodore Sturgeon, who was a Star Trek writer who had written great science fiction books and novels that I'd grown up reading, he was teaching an adult education class. And as an undergrad, I wasn't allowed to take the adult education classes, but I thought, well, hell with that. It's Ted Sturgeon, I'm going to take it. And so another rule I would say is, anything that disempowers you, ignore it. If there's rules that are set against you, ignore them. Just do what your heart tells you to do, as long as you don't harm anyone. You don't want to be, hurtful to others. But in that case, I just signed up for the class. And one of the teaching, and Theodore Sturgeon became one of my mentors when I was 19. So there was a teaching assistant in Theodore Sturgeon's class, and his name was Michael Reeves. And he had just come out of Clarion a year or 2 before me, and he had been writing professionally, and he was just trying to write an animation for the networks. And so we became friends, and when I got out of college, he said, well, I'm writing for this show called Space Stars, and it had Space Ghost. It was Hanna-Barbera, and he asked if I'd like to collaborate with him, because he was writing all the episodes. And I said, sure, and then we wrote for Smurfs together, and then it was very clear that I could write these on my own. So I just started writing animation, and I rose very quickly in animation, but my heart really wasn't where I wanted to be. So I then earned enough to live for the year from writing animation. I could earn about $100,000 in 3 months, which is a lot back then. And because I was the god of animation, I was doing very, very well in that arena. And I told all my employers that I was going to take time off to write this live-action screenplay, and that I wouldn't be available. And they said, great. And the day I stopped to write the screenplay, they started calling me with offers of animation work. And I had to turn down $200,000 in 2 days, and that wrecks your writing day. So then from then on, I wrote at UCLA, where they couldn't reach me. It was before cell phones, and I would just check my answering machine at the end of the day so I could write. And I finished that screenplay, and it sold, and it got me a pilot deal with NBC, and that pilot got made, and I was off and running in live action, writing for the networks and the studios. So my point in that is, you must take a stand for where you're going and what you believe in. Even if you're doing well, if it's not your dream, you must take a stand and be willing to take the licks, take the blows, and be willing to take the losses in addition. But the point that I was getting at before that is, because I had Theodore Sturgeon mentoring me, that led to me meeting Michael Reeves, who was a professional who brought me into television. So it wasn't me writing spec scripts and trying to get an agent to take me or anything like that. It was someone opening a door for me through a friendship, through that, but also he knew I could write. So, and at the same time, I was writing The Twilight Zone Companion at 22 because when I got out of UCLA, I knew I wanted to be a writer, producer in television, and there were no classes in that. So I thought, well, how do I learn this? And I said, well, why don't I take one of the greatest shows ever made and learn how it was made, and then by emulating the people who made it, I can do that job. I can learn that job. So it was 2 years after Rod Serling's death, and I was 22 years old. I'd sold one short story. If I'd asked 100 people how likely it was that Rod Serling's widow would let me write that book, 100 people would have said, no, none, you have no chance. Which is why your future and your career is not a majority opinion. It's your opinion. And what I did was, because she had already turned down major journalists, and so I couldn't go directly to her, she'd have said no. So what I did was, I met one writer who'd worked on The Twilight Zone at a science fiction convention. So I interviewed him. His name was George Clayton Johnson. And I asked him who he knew that I could also interview. So he connected me up with a couple of people, and they connected me up with a couple of people. And over 3 months, I interviewed 30 people who had worked on The Twilight Zone. By then, I knew a lot about the subject. I felt very confident I could pull this off. And then I went to Carol Serling. And it was at Rod's house. It was exactly as he'd left it. There was one room just for the awards. It was 6 Emmys, the Peabody Awards, the 3 Hugos, and there were 2 living rooms. There was an Olympic-sized pool. His office was a building back of the house. All the books were there, all his scrapbooks, the films, cans of his Twilight Zone episodes, 60mm prints and film cans stacked high in the garage. And then upstairs in the attic were his scrapbooks, his scripts, his files. I literally crawled through Rod Serling's attic, which was great. And But after 3 months, I met with Carol Serling, and I stood there and I told her, she was sitting, I was standing, and I just kind of pitched what I was going to do. And then she must have talked to the people I'd interviewed who she trusted, and they said, well, this kid, we think he can pull it off. And she then said, you have full access to everything. And I went through all the scrapbooks, all the files, everything. I interviewed over 100 people. The book came out. It was a huge success. It's still in print. It sold over 500,000 copies. And the New York Times named it one of 10 science fiction books for the ages in 2006, and I was the only nonfiction book on that list. So Ray Bradbury and I were on that list, so it was so much fun to go over to Ray's that day and say, hey, we're both on this list in the New York Times. That was just, that was a great moment. It all starts with doing the work. The work is what impresses people with you, and so you do your work first. And sometimes it can have amazing benefits. So for instance, when I was producing Sliders, they made a mini-series of Moby Dick. And Gregory Peck was in it as Father Mapple doing this sermon. And they cast him because he played Ahab in the 1950s movie that John Huston directed. So I went to the screening, and Gregory Peck was in the row behind me, and I asked him if I could mail him a lobby card of Moby Dick, and he signed it. And Ray Bradbury had written that movie for John Huston, but it was basically felt at the time that Gregory Peck was miscast. He wasn't perfect as Ahab, but he's great as Father Mapple. He won an Emmy for that in the miniseries. And so I got this weird idea, because I'd come upon this record album of Charles Laughton in an audio adaptation of Moby Dick, and he was great. He was this brilliant actor. And so I edited together this audio version of Moby Dick that had Charles Laughton as Ahab, Gregory Peck as Father Mapple, and Richard Basehart as Ishmael. And I gave it out as a Christmas present to my friends one year as a CD. And I never would have had the temerity to give it Ray Bradbury, because I was screwing with his work. But one day I come home and there's a message on my answering machine, and it says, "Hello, Mr. Zicree. This is Ray Bradbury. I've just heard your Moby Dick CD. Please call me." And I thought, oh God, I've pissed off Ray Bradbury. And so I called him with my heart in my throat, and he says, "I was dear friends with Charles Laughton, and I love what you did. It's so wonderful. Please, you've got to come over to the house. Let's sit down and talk." Great. So I went to Ray's house. This is 10 or 15 years ago, about 15, and we sat down, we talked, and we became fast friends. And so from then on, every month or two, I'd go to his house and we'd just hang out and talk. And he became this great friend, this great mentor to me, a great advisor. But it came from me doing this work that I had no expectation of getting anything from. I just wanted to create something that would entertain me and my friends, and it entertained Ray Bradbury too. And we became friends. So that's another great way that you can do something that will get many doors to open, by creating your truth, coming from creative delight, and just following through on it.